Hey everybody, it's Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down Show. Today's episode's pretty cool. We have a returning guest, someone who's been a Green Beret, so he's an operator, but also advised at the highest levels in the White House, working as a senior advisor for Vice President Dick Cheney and the President George W. Bush. He also has worked at a senior level advising the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. So a very knowledgeable guy, and he wrote a book called The Warrior Diplomat. Well, now he's the United States Congress representative for the Florida 6th District. And that means that he's in Congress. He's a legislator. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk to him to get an idea of what he does and how he does it on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. You know, in this time where all this divide, I thought it would be helpful to just to hear like how he does his business. And I thought it would be helpful to get a better understanding of what people in Congress do. So we'll be grabbing more of these kinds of shows. But to get an understanding of who legislators are, what they do, what their challenges are. It's easy to sit back and criticize them, but there's a body of 500 plus people, and they're trying to all get something done, and it's very hard to do. And I think that's sort of the point here is how do we get some reality as to what happens in a day-to-day life of someone who's in Congress. So yes, we'll touch a little bit about the presidential impeachment and that kind of thing. But more importantly, what does he do day in, day out? How does he make his decisions? And I think it's a fascinating conversation. I'm absolutely chasing people on both sides of the aisle, so get ready. There'll be more of these shows coming up. Either way, support the show. If you like what we're doing, share the show, buy the shirts, and tell people about it. I see people out there doing it. Thank you so much for doing that. And if it is your first time listening, understand that we do a lot around here. We do 5 shows a week. You might hear musicians, you might hear scholars, you might hear warriors, you might hear people you've never heard of before. We have great tales of all stripes. If you ever want to have a recommendation on an episode, let me know. I'll tell you right now, listen to Kelly Hilier's episode, Saddam Hussein's Last Best Friend. Listen to that, and you'll get an idea of what we do. Hey, the Break It Down show is all about us. We all do this together, so contribute. I'd love to hear from you, especially you folks who are international. There are so many different countries. Spain, I see you. Denmark, I see you. Sweden, hello. Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. All these different places have people actively listening, and I thank you for it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hey, everybody, Save the Brave. Go to savethebrave.org. Put a small amount of money in to donate each month. We'll come in through PayPal, take that money out, and put it to work saving veterans' lives. If you're into that, that's great. If not, do something charitable. Let me know what it is. I'd love to support your charity, too. I can do that through Charity on Top. So just let me know where you're at, who you're doing, and how you're helping. Here comes Michael Waltz.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Representative Mike Waltz, and you are listening to the Break It Down Show.
Hey, so you've been on the show before, so thanks for coming back. I love having you on. So for those that don't know, Michael's been a lot of things. He's currently a U.S. Congressman, but he's also been a long-time Special Forces guy and also worked for the State Department and wrote a book about his time being a diplomat and as well as a Special Forces operator. First off, how cool is it that you get to be Florida 6, you know, as an Army guy?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a good call sign, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Of my, of course, I had, like many people, I had the Punisher call sign, so had that on my last tour, Punisher 6. But I'll take Florida 6 too.
Hell yeah! Hey, first off, thanks for doing the job that you do, serving in Congress. You know, in any time, it's a big deal, and it takes a lot of guts. And I know it's a hard job. As someone who's an operator from the background, you can always outwork problems. But does that hold true in Congress? Can you just outwork your I don't want to say your adversaries?
Well, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, thank you for recognizing it isn't easy, and it is. I say all the time, you know, what is easy is to yell at the TV, to post on Facebook, to argue with your relatives at Thanksgiving, right? To be a kind of a couch commando,
right.
But to actually roll up your sleeves and try to be part of the solution and really put yourself out there, because as soon as you declare, you know, you have a good depending on your district, 30 to 50% against you already.
Right.
Just about how demographics play out. In that sense, it isn't easy. But on the other hand, it's an honor. I've spent my entire adult life defending our republic, and now to be a part of it is, without overusing the term, is truly an honor. And I've told my team and I've told myself, if there's any day that we pull up to the Capitol and you don't have a little bit of a wow moment and a little bit of an appreciation when you walk up those steps, then it's probably time to move on. So in that sense, it really is incredible to be part of this and just amazing experiment that is constantly evolving. Winston Churchill, famously said, American democracy is the worst system of government in the world, except all the others. Right.
Right.
And it's just really great to be a part of it. Good, bad, and ugly. And there's plenty of all of that, but I am an optimist on America and do believe that we always self-correct and we will move forward.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, you and I both have seen what happens, and you've talked about it openly, what happens in other countries when you have a time that's as combative as we have right now in the U.S. They solve it with,
Sure.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was in Iraq in Baghdad district, and they blew a shakeup, and we were sort of,
Right.
Lightly concerned about that. And the Iraqi general said, he smokes a cigarette. It is politics. And it's like,
That's right.
okay.
No, I'll just say, it just reminded me that one of the more special moments I've had thus far was standing with my 15-year-old daughter, on the floor of the House of Representatives as we took the oath.
Yeah.
Getting sworn in. That was special in and of itself. And although it pained me deeply as a Republican to see Paul Ryan handing the gavel to Nancy Pelosi, at the same time reminding her that, hey, in all kinds of other places around the world, that doesn't just happen
Right.
so easily. And it certainly doesn't happen peacefully. That usually comes with bullets and bloodshed. So, fast forward now a year later with everything that's going on with impeachment. On the one hand, is this a terrible time in our country? Absolutely. And do I have all kinds of issues with how it's being done? Yes, I do. But that also, in many countries around the world, would come with a lot of bullets and a lot of bloodshed. And the fact that we are muddling our way through this system, even though a lot of people, I think, are trying to take advantage of it for the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
it still is, I think, a testament to the strength of our republic.
Yeah, I agree. I always say, even though I don't often agree with what Representative Ilhan Omar says, I am absolutely stoked that we are in a country where a person who is a refugee from an Islamic country can become a representative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just incredible,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's right. And I tell, my daughter and classes and other places that I speak to all the time, look, if we're debating, even if we're screaming at each other, in a lot of other places, they would be shooting at each other. So we just have to keep that in perspective. And that's what I think one of the things of being a veteran provides us, is that we've been in those other places. We've seen how bad things really can get. And when back home, when we see people just pulling their hair out, that the wheels are coming off the bus of our country, like, just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
As we say in the Army, take a knee, face out, drink water, calm down, because in a lot of other places it would be a lot worse.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to, like you, have the experience of having mortars and shells and rockets and missiles launched at me. And when Iran launched their missiles, I was able to put on Facebook, like, everybody calm down. We don't know. And this is before we knew anything. This is likely nothing. This is how these things go. I know it seems scary to you all, but understand things get thrown at us all the time, and we just steel ourselves, and they're the front line, and that's sort of how it is. But instead of saying World War III is going to start.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Let's just not buy into the hype and bring that perspective. And that's one of the reasons I think we talked about before. I think we need more veterans.
Yeah.
Back into our political leadership. One of many reasons. One is the basics of leadership, followership, teamwork. But the other is that we bring perspective of having served and fought and seen how the rest of the world lives compared to how good we have it here. even when we're in a more divisive time than normal. It's nothing compared to the rest of the world.
I'm fascinated about your day-to-day work. I mean, look, as someone who's commanded troops and been in commands, you know how much time the commander spends on things like, do we have boots? Do we have food? Do we have awards?
Sure.
All these things. How much of your time is spent on, I mean, like Representative Hills from down in my area, down here kind of by Orange County, LA, she got caught in part because her finance stuff was not straight, and that happens.
Right.
There are so many things to mind the shop. How much of your time is spent minding the shop?
Well, I kind of divide it into 4 different buckets, at least in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Bucket one that often gets overlooked, but I think is the most important, is what you actually do in the district and for the district directly. So in my case, in Northeast Florida, I have 3 offices down there. I have caseworkers, outreach representatives. I'm really fortunate to have a retired 1-star general that kind of manages all of it. And those are what I call base hits. Those are people that are coming in, they're having issues with the VA, they're having issues with Social Security or with immigration or you name it. And they have no idea how to navigate the labyrinth that is our federal bureaucracy. And my staff down there, helps them. And sometimes they'll elevate it to me, and I need to, fire a missile over to Assistant Secretary of Transportation or you name it.
Yeah.
And shake the tree and get things done. And those are very tangible, and you're immediately helping people. And I love the district work. So that's one. The other is the legislative work. So think of that as like rugby, in that there's 435 of us all running around with their own agendas and ideas and things they want to get done. So the more you pile behind your side of the scrum than the other, you kind of nudge things forward. And that can be as grand as trying to reform immigration, or that could be, what I call more base hits, like getting more STEM dollars for the local universities in your district. There's the committee work that dominates a lot of time. That's kind of bucket 3. I'm on Armed Services, and then on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. The main thing there is who do you interact with? Who do you have oversight of in the executive branch? So Armed Services obviously is the Defense Department. Science, Space, and Technology is NASA, NOAA, the National Weather Service, the National Science Foundation. Obviously, if you are on the judiciary, then you have oversight of the Department of Justice, FBI, those agencies. So that interaction takes up a lot. And then finally is the political piece, which is what I think you were getting to with Representative Hill. Look, we are up for re-election every 2 years. So you are either running, you just finished running for office, or you're getting ready to run. Just never... It never stops. You're constantly rebuilding the war chest. There's the fundraising piece. It's politics, and you will have an opponent or you won't, or, that dynamic will always shift. And just to, not to beat the dead horse, but to overlay that a little bit, every 10 years, because we are population based, meaning if you have a district in, the inner city, it's going to be very small. If you have a rural district, it's going to be very large. Each representative represents roughly 800,000 to 1 million people, and that's shifting all over. So Florida will probably gain 2 or 3 representatives because of the population coming into Florida. A state like, say, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Massachusetts is losing. And every 10 years when the census, we have redistricting. And there's a lot of, it's really kind of in the weeds on how the sausage is made, but how you draw these districts can get very contentious and very political and have huge impacts on what the House of Representatives looks like.
Yeah, boy, I can only imagine. We've actually done some shows on the districting process and how do you do it fairly so people can agree. And it just seems to be such a mess.
Well, and that's impacted also by, the state legislatures draw those maps. So the makeup of which party controls those state legislatures as you roll into the couple of years after a census has a huge impact as well. Then invariably you have lawsuits. So how the state Supreme Courts look in terms of liberal versus conservative makes a big difference. it gets complicated.
When you're in that scrum inside Congress doing the legislative stuff, and to be honest, I'm pretty rough on the legislative branch because you guys have the hardest fight to fight because there are approximately 500 of you. And a lot of our problems, immigration, that's a legislation problem. How do we, how much time do you spend away from like looking at bipartisan things? Like how cognizant of you are you about like, these things can't all be Republican or Democrat. They have to be solutions for people.
Well, so I spend a good amount of time, particularly with now, because we have Republicans in control of the Senate. Obviously, the Democrats in control of the House and President Trump. So coming to a consensus on something like entitlement reform or healthcare reform is going to be incredibly difficult. So I focus on things that are more bipartisan. So right now, for example, this isn't anything exciting, but it's important how federal funds are allocated to each state. That formula hasn't been updated since the mid 80s.
Wow.
It's largely population based. Florida's population has doubled in that amount of time. So we're third from the top in terms of needs, third from the bottom in terms of money that we get. That will be much more of a which states stand to gain and which states stand to lose if that formula is updated, rather than in California, I think it's going to be about break even. So that isn't a partisan issue. That's more of a parochial issue, a kind of geographic issue. Those are things that I'm focused on. And then things like, in the defense bill, I focused a lot on Gold Star families. I think we do a good job, a much better job of taking care of our wounded warriors, but we're not doing a great job of taking care of the families of the fallen, because typically that funeral happens and then, people move on, but yet the families that have suffered the most aren't being taken care of like they should. So we, in this last defense bill, got the what was called the widow's tax eliminated. I was able to there was a provision in there that the Defense Department only paid for the remains, once we lose a soldier or sailor or Marine, to only go to one location. So if a family wanted to have a memorial service in their hometown and then have the burial, say, at Arlington National Cemetery, the family had to pay for it, believe it or not. And I had that happen to me, to one of my Green Berets. I got that eliminated. I mean, DOD can cover that extra plane ticket. You shouldn't be going to the family in the worst moment of their life and saying, well, if you want them to be in Arlington, you have to, fork over the cost. Those kind of things we got done and can get done.
It seems like there's a never ending, as I think about all of the combat time that you have, I have, there are so many people that we're not providing for properly. Like you think about, like for a long time, I was basically a DA civilian, and I went on combat patrols every day. So, there's no specific recognition for that. And
right.
I don't want ribbons, but I've stood in formations with the commander as he gave out all of these cabs, and then I'm like, okay, great. But I was in the same formation. I was in the same movement, and then also the damage that happens, you get some person who's out there, they're an expert in their field, and they break their hip or something like that. It's like, hey, sorry. We don't do a good job with that,
That's right. Yeah, those types of revisions, and then also for our folks that are over there on some type of U.S. government contract. And, in the most recent case where the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq launched rockets into one of our bases and killed an American, the media kept referring to that individual as an American contractor, as though that was some type of lesser American. And on both Fox and CNN, I asked the host to please stop doing that. They're just an American, period. And that is from Soleimani, who has killed so many in the past with so much blood on his hands. Yeah, we shouldn't stand for one more. And that was one more too many. And fortunately, we have a president, in my opinion, that said enough and took him out.
Yeah,
did something that should have been done a long time ago. But yeah, I agree with you. This kind of, classification of different people as though one person's life means more than the other.
Yeah, that derogatory nature, because I've worked on contracts before too, and I'm positive I was doing my damnedest to do a great job helping guys like you, SEALs, out there doing what I knew how to do, because I'm a top-notch collector. I'm one of those guys. This is more for the audience than for you. When you are a collector like I am and you get good in the military, you get promoted away from the field, so you don't ever fully realize your skills. And if you are good, they have you plan and do something else. I was able to stay at the ground and work at the highest level. Like, there's no one that can out collect me. So a contractor is basically the only person that can do that because they like that work and they're willing to go out and put themselves in harm's way. It's not a negative thing to be a contractor. You're not a mercenary. You're someone who's filling a capacity role. Yeah.
No, not at all. Well, no, I agree. I think that the popular image has become, kind of these tattooed, Blackwater type. The media has cast this picture, but the vast majority, as you know, are cooks, are providing a service, or providing analysis, or interpreters. And if you walk into any modern military command, back here in the United States or forward, overseas, you're going to see uniforms. Obviously, you're going to see U.S. government civilians, and then you're going to see contractors. And frankly, you can barely, especially overseas, barely tell the difference. And the contractors often provide the continuity of knowledge. As the military and U.S. government civilians are rotating out constantly, the contractors are often the continuity and the experience, because many of them are retired military. So it's a critical part of what we do. I am proud, in a previous life, I helped build a small firm into one that is doing very well. So it gave me, as a CEO, a phenomenal kind of view into that world, but also an experience of building a business. And it's a critical part of our national security.
That my ability to stay and have units rotate over the top of me, once they slowed down long enough to listen, allowed me to get them to come about a lot faster, because I had knowledge they would never have, because they couldn't catch up. And it's such a powerful tool when used properly.
That's
and
right.
The other thing, you mentioned a lot of people that are capacity driven. There's also folks that do payroll, AR, AP. Like, there's so many jobs that have to be done in theater. So there's someone sitting there away from their family doing an administrative role that absolutely has to be done locally. And God bless those folks too,
Sure. Well, and just one little interesting point there, that move, that kind of dynamic actually started in the Clinton administration over in Bosnia, with a move towards, hey, let's free up those roles, apply those, have contractors do those more administrative support roles, so that we have a larger percentage of our military pulling triggers and focused on the combat roles. So that has actually that shift has been occurring over many decades, and actually, started in earnest in the Clinton administration with the drawdown post Desert Storm.
So I want to go back to your buckets and look at that. I mean, obviously, you're highly capable, and
sure,
there's still going to be a learning curve, though. Which learning curve for you is the steepest? Is it managing all of the smaller things that come up and not getting distracted? If I come to you and say, hey, Mike, out here in our district, we're just not getting a fair shot to community college. I need you to look into, where is the learning curve the steepest for you in terms of how to manage your time and your resources?
Well, you have to, one, you have to do all of it. And I actually find that really intellectually stimulating. I mean, in any given day, I could be dealing with education issues, e-cigarettes, opioids, Russians, the surge in Russian submarines and how we're going to deal with that, the rise of China, you name it. I mean, that's where I put one of the buckets was your committee time. That is going to, if you're on, Armed Services Committee, that's going to move you in one direction than, say, being on the Education and Labor Committee, right? In terms of, because most bills move through the committees first before they go through to a vote on the House floor. So just by nature of what committees you're on, that is going to dictate where you specialize, so to speak, but you still have to deal with all of it for your district. And then you'll have certain, more district-specific issues. Obviously, water issues are going to be very different in Montana than they are going to be in Florida. So that gives you some flavor. And, but the other thing you have to do is just figure out a few areas where you're really going to, week after week, despite everything that comes up and everything that comes at you, you're going to carve out time for your priorities. For me, this year, I'm going to consistently carve out time to move legislation on national service. I am convinced that if we can move our youth back to a sense of service, that we'll get the country moving back in a greater direction or a better direction. And the other piece is on some water legislation for that, will really impact Florida, that formula that I mentioned. And then, of course, every year we have our defense bill, and I'll have certain priorities within that defense bill. In terms of a learning curve, it's somewhat unique to me in that I've never run for office before. This is my first time. A lot of members here served in state legislatures or served as city councilmen. So, I've had to really learn the legislative process. That said, for a lot of them, they're new to Washington. I served in the Bush White House and served in the Bush Pentagon. So, everybody brings their experiences to the table. A lot of those folks who have served in legislatures before at the state level have never stepped foot in Washington, and they'll have that learning curve that I won't. So it really varies. I don't know if that answered your question.
You're obviously still getting better at being a representative. You learn new things and always add new things to the bucket. I was just curious that when you get in there, it can be overwhelming. There's rules to how you speak and when you speak and all these things to master. I would have to learn those if I went,
Oh, absolutely. And when I have a fantastic staff as well that will help walk you through that. One of the, this last election in 2018 was a Democratic wave, meaning the Republicans lost over 40 seats. The silver lining in that is that was 40 full sets of Republican staff that no longer had a member that were looking for jobs. So I was really able to cherry pick some of the best of the best, some all-stars there, and I have a fantastic team.
So I want to ask you.
Yeah, they keep me straight. And from the military, right? As any commander is going to rely on his staff and rely on his team, and you're an idiot, if you think you are the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. You can never be the smartest guy in the room, and as soon as you think you are, you got to say, "Tell me what I'm missing," because you just can't know.
That's right. That's right.
People oftentimes talk about term limits, and my response is always vote your guy out. Like, vote your incumbent out. And then it's like, my guy's good. I'm like, okay, great. But it seems like to me, if every 2 years you're having to rerun, you're on a new committee, you're constantly really a new person every 2 years. You're constantly having to update who you are. I can't imagine that Congress is the same as it was 10 years ago. It must be a totally different ballgame. Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. As it was 10 years ago, it must be a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, so I have mixed feelings about term limits, just to be candid. On the one hand, because we're up every 2 years, there is a lot more turnover than you would think. I think there is a very small but very highly visible few that have been there a very long time that kind of gives people this notion that members are just, there for 20, 30 years. There's a few, but that really is probably less than a few dozen out of the 435 of us. For example, on the Republican side, there's about 200 Republicans there now, and over half are new just in the last 8 to 10 years. In this last class, 2018, there were 92 new representatives that came in. So just in 2 years, 25% of the House of Representatives turned over. So there actually is, just by dint of being up for election every 2 years, a pretty healthy turnover. And I've seen in Florida, for example, there are term limits in place in the state legislature. And what that does, it's just I think an unintended side effect. I'm not saying, we shouldn't have term limits, but it really does empower the bureaucratic staff. Because if you're trying to push through big reforms that take, a long time to get all the stakeholders behind, and if they're unpopular, the staff can just outwait. I mean, your last couple of years, you're basically a lame duck because they know you're out of there soon. So, it has its pros and cons.
Yeah. I was thinking about this as well. We have the nation has gotten bigger, the House has gotten bigger, but the Supreme Court, I'm not saying stock it. I'm not saying any of those political kind of things. I'm just saying that their capacity to hear cases hasn't changed in over 140 years. It's like 1860s was when we set at 9.
Right.
Is it time to look at change? I mean, there's no way they're hearing enough cases compared to how many people there are now.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, really the effect that has on the court system.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you in the House of Representatives, because we were population-based, until the 1920s, we increased the size of the House of Representatives every time we had a new census to keep the ratio of how many representatives or how many people we represent pretty low. When the country was founded, there was one for about every 30,000. Now there's one for every 800,000 to a million.
Right.
On the other hand, it just politically to kind of say, well, hey, we need more politicians there. We need to increase the number. Isn't going to be very popular, isn't going to be received so well. So that's just the kind of the dynamic. And there are those, particularly on the left this cycle, that are calling for an increase in the size of the Supreme Court, if that's what you were getting at. But then, they're accused of basically stacking it. Because they don't like the current makeup.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to stack it. I just want to give them more capacity to hear cases, and be able to, just because there are more people, there are going to be more cases. Maybe the lower courts can handle it. The court below them has gotten bigger, but they say no to most cases, and these things have to be dealt with. And it affects people's lives in a way.
Well, I can tell you on the immigration side, it's a huge issue. There's such a backlog of cases, and that's one of the real issues with our border right now is people are, in many, it doesn't make them bad people, but they're gaming the system in the sense they're not true asylum cases. They know as long as they step foot in the United States, they can ask for asylum. They're essentially given a ticket. And because the backlog is so tremendous and asked to come back in 5 years, well, we know that the vast majority don't.
Right.
And that's a pathway for illegal immigration.
Yeah.
And I know that on the immigration courts, we funded a pretty substantial increase in the number of judges and staff to handle these cases. But again, we can't just buy our way out of that problem. That's a much more complicated problem that we could probably do a whole show.
Yeah. I mean, just quickly, is there an elegant solution to immigration? I mean, I was doing a show with maybe Jason Piccolo. He's a former Border Patrol, former Army guy. We were talking about like when you surge in people, you have to contract out vetting. You have to contract out these things. And as a person who's vetted people,
that's right.
6 a day max if you want a quality vetting process, if we're really going to understand. And that's one time, Right. And so it becomes financially impossible to move this capacity out there. Is there an elegant solution to figuring out immigration?
It's for anyone who tells you there's kind of a bumper sticker solution, I would say they're just giving you a bumper sticker answer. It really is multifaceted. It's a poverty issue in Central America. It's a border security issue in terms of building a physical barrier where we can't have surveillance and border patrol, and at least that physical barrier then is able to channel people so that we can do that proper vetting. I think I do think there is a sequencing. We have to handle the illegal side before we can reform the legal side, because otherwise you're just going to repeat all of the same problems. Imagine if the president today, and I'm not saying I'm for this, but imagine if the president today granted amnesty to all 10 to 11 million illegals that are estimated to be here, and quote unquote solved it. Well, that would just create such a vacuum.
Yeah.
We would be in the same place, 2, 3, 4 years from now. So, and frankly, it would probably be worse. So we do. So there is a sequencing to it, and the president and the administration have put together some merit-based formulas for how they would like to reform the legal side if we could ever come to some kind of agreement on the illegal side.
Yeah, and I can attest. I was in Rosarito, just 20 miles south of the border in San Diego, and there are Central Americans sleeping in the street. I mean, it's creating a homeless problem in Mexico that now they have to deal with. I mean, and this is not our problem. It's not Mexico's problem. It's everybody's problem because these folks are, the poverty is causing them to go to where there's less poverty and opportunity. But how do you handle it all? And it's I don't envy that problem for you guys.
No, and unfortunately, it's become so polarized and so politicized, and even deals that typically were viewed as bipartisan and reasonable in the past. Like I think the deal that was on the table 2 years ago, which would have provided $25 billion for border security, which would have given a pathway for DACA, would have gotten rid of this ridiculous lottery system that we have on the legal side. It was a very reasonable, at least first step and start, and we couldn't even get there. And I'll just throw it out there. I think it's people that just do not want to give this president anything.
Well, yeah.
They do not want to have him perceived as with any kind of victory or even if it's a reasonable compromise that 10 years ago everybody would have signed up for. 10 years ago, everybody signed up for what was called the National Fences Act in 2005. That they won't provide it today, and it's really frustrating and unfortunate.
Yeah, it is frustrating, and I won't make you say this, but the president creates a lot of his own problems, through his actions, and also when he shows up, people just are driven crazy by him. So even if he's culpable in some way, there's plenty of people that just, like you said, won't allow a single win, and it makes your guys' job in the legislation hard.
It does, and look, there are all kinds of people on both sides of the aisle. They don't like what he says. They don't like how he tweets. They don't like his demeanor. I, for one, am very much focused on what's actually being done. And if you look at the actions, if you look at criminal justice reform that Democrats and Republicans have been trying to get done since the 90s, it's done. If you look at the right to try legislation, which is just common sense, that if you've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, you should be able to try pretty much whatever drug you want. You're told that you're dying. If you look at the tax reform that's gone through, I mean, I can go on and on. If you look at what actually is being done, I think more Americans than not will look at their lives this year and say, I'm better off and my family's better off than I was 4 years ago. And that's what determines the election.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I didn't vote for President Trump. I likely won't vote for him again because I kind of can't take his behavior. But I do have to say someone's got to run in the face of a powerful economy, historic lows and unemployment.
Dow 30,000, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's their kitchen table issues.
Yeah.
And I have cousins and relatives. I do not come from means that have more work than they could handle. And 3-4 years ago, their business was going out of business or they were unemployed.
Yeah.
And that is, regardless of the rhetoric, and we could, talk about that too, but I'm focused on what's getting done.
I hear you. And I look at the actions of the secondary market, when Apple, and this is years ago now, when Apple reinvests $350 billion that was offshore into America, that tells me that there's confidence in our capitalist system. And there's one guy that gets credit for that, and whether we like him or not, that is getting done.
Yeah. Well, and I think just to not belabor that point, but with USMCA and with this first phase of the China trade deal, I think you're going to see an economy that is doing very well, just light on fire. I think we still have upside with those trade deals coming into place. So we'll see. Yeah,
it's crazy that the USMCA finally gets through, right? Like when he's being impeached. It's just it's a crazy time,
You don't have to tell me. I'm right in the middle of it. Yes, for sure.
How is it day to day with your Democrat peers? I mean, are you guys able to have conversations, or is everybody kind of cloistered and not interacting?
It really depends. I'll tell you that for the most part, everything is very cordial. A lot of the spaces there are a little bit cramped because the building's very old. So you're crammed in elevators together, or you're in a small committee room, and everyone's very cordial. It's usually when you get on Twitter or you go to the microphone that people get really brave and the sparks start flying. For me, my day-to-day interaction tends to be with a lot of Democrats who are also veterans, because I'm on Armed Services Committee. So we have that commonality of service. Again, why I'd say we need more veterans to get elected. We have that perspective of what bad is, which is getting shot at or blown up, not getting called a name on Twitter. So for mine, it's been very good. And I co-founded a bipartisan caucus called For Country that is primarily made up of exclusively of Republicans and Democrats who have served. And we have focused on a lot of military and veterans issues that we can, come together on and that we know needs to get done. And, if you think about it, in the foxhole, nobody cares. I couldn't even tell you my special forces team what political affiliation they were. They don't care about black, white, or brown. All you care about is mission, country, moving and moving the country forward. If you don't get results in combat and in business, really bad things happen. So the For Country Caucus has been really focused on how do we come together, even in the most divisive of times, and come together around common legislation, and let's move the ball.
How many service members are there in Congress right now?
There is about 15% in the I don't know the exact number, but by percentage, we're hovering between 15 and 18% in the House and in the Senate. And that is actually a record low in our nation's history. The peak was 74% in 1978. That was the peak. And we have declined, and now we're at a record low. And I think that is a big reason for the record amount of dysfunction. I really do.
Yeah. I can believe that. I don't want to go past this and it goes back a few minutes in time, but also in terms of immigration, we have got to get better at supporting the people from another country that support us from interpreters. It's embarrassing to me as a guy that has used a lot of interpreters to think that, these are potentially great Americans if we just allowed it,
Absolutely. Legislatively, we reauthorized, it's called the SIV, the Special Immigrant Visas. We reauthorized those this year in the defense bill, and then we also expanded it to the Kurds. Previously, it was for Iraq and Afghanistan. Great. Now it's for the Syrian Kurds as well. But bottom line, these are people that have stood and fought with us. They don't just put their lives on the line. They put their entire family's life on the line, because if they are found out by the terrorists or by the insurgents, they don't just go after them. They go after their entire family. In fact, one of mine was hauled out of his home, was beheaded, and several of his brothers and cousins were also killed with him. And he was on the waiting list for this special immigrant visa. I also successfully sponsored some over, and to your point, they are doing great. They've started their own business. Their kids are in school. I mean, they're the most entrepreneurial, thankful, motivated new American citizens you will ever come across. And when we go to the broader point of who deserves to be here, merit-based immigration, someone who was selected off a lottery or someone who risked their lives to fight alongside our military. So you're not going to find a bigger supporter than you do here. And I recently did an event with General Petraeus, Ambassador Ryan Crocker, for an organization called No One Left Behind. It's a nonprofit that focuses on helping these new citizens, these SIV immigrants, integrate once they're here.
I want you to put half of your diplomat hat on and half of your representative hat on. Our Kurdistan relationship, there isn't technically a Kurdistan. How do we go forward? Is there a Kurdistan in our future, do you think? I mean, what is your sense for this, looking at both sides of it? Because it's a complex issue.
It's very complex, and unfortunately I don't have a simple answer except that in each country where there are Kurds, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, the answers are all very different. In terms of, I think, where they are going forward. I think for the United States, they are one of our best allies in the Middle East. They are moderate Muslims that share many of our values. If you look at the areas that are thriving in Iraq, and those other countries. They tend to be Kurdish areas. So I think that relationship needs to stay strong. I think we need it from a geopolitical standpoint, but then also from a values standpoint. And I'm a big advocate for it.
I know. So first off, everybody should know this is Michael Waltz. He's a representative from the 6th District in Florida, and we're just trying to have this calm, rational conversation. I'm going to tee up a couple of hard questions, and you can pick which one you want. And you don't have to answer either of them ultimately, but when I look at where we're at right now, if Pete was president, right, on day one, I wouldn't do anything. I'd look to you guys and how do we build consensus? So I see consensus as being a major problem for our country. And then our national debt, at some point we have to do something about this because it's going to get leveraged against us in a negative way. So you can answer either one or both, whatever. But what are your thoughts on those two things?
So let me take the consensus first. One is I think consensus often comes from shared experiences, right? And that's why I'm a big advocate of getting us back to national service. What do I mean when I say that? That's not mandatory like the draft.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily just military. One, I think we can incentivize it through a lot of educational benefits and others. And two, not just military. That can be inner city tutoring, national parks, elderly care, AmeriCorps, Teach for America. But bottom line, how do we get young folks off the couch, off their phones, off the video games, and out in their community and out serving again with a sense of service? What did we learn from the draft? One, you had kids at 18 years old that learned leadership, followership, teamwork, all of that goodness. And the other piece was they did it alongside other Americans that they normally wouldn't interact with. Inner city kid from Detroit, farm boy from Western Indiana, Jewish kid from Brooklyn, all forced together. And if you couldn't overcome your differences, you had a drill sergeant booting your rear end to help you get there. And then you went back into American society and lived your life. And it really came home to me with a veteran, a mentor of mine that told me the first African-American, the first black man that he ever uttered a word to coming from the segregated South was his bunkmate in the Navy. Mm-hmm. He in his words, his parents were bigots, his family were bigoted. He was in the segregated South. He had never spoken to a black person, and he probably would have stayed that way had he not had that forcing function. I'm convinced if we get back to that forcing function, you will then have a society like we had with the Greatest Generation. It was no coincidence that the Civil Rights Movement came after that, right? After they came back from World War II, where everyone was forced together for a common cause. So that's one piece. I think legislatively, we need to focus at least first on the low-hanging fruit that is bipartisan, say like transportation, infrastructure, getting our veterans what they need. I mean, things that can, success typically begets success. And I wish we had focused there first in 2016. And then finally on our national debt, look, all of the things that we debate, the defense budget, food stamps, Homeland Security, those are a drop in the bucket compared to our entitlement spending. That is what's called the mandatory spending. By law, we can't adjust it, and it is exploding. That's what's exploding our debt, and what's undergirding that is the cost of healthcare. And it is just exploding through the roof for all kinds of reasons. The difference of what I think you're going to see in 2020 is when I say we need to lower the cost of healthcare, I mean selling across state lines. I mean tort reform, free market reforms, things that are actually getting after fraud in a serious way, things that will actually drive down costs. When the Democrats, particularly on the national side, that are talking Medicare for all, say we have to lower costs, they mean government takeover. And if you just look at the problems with the VA, that is government-run healthcare. That's 1,200 hospitals and clinics the government is running. I don't think that's the answer. I think that'll actually explode costs. It'll just shift it from, the insurance industry and people paying it to taxpayers. But the incentive to drive down costs will be gone. And, I just don't think that's the answer at all.
Well, I love that you said tort reform. That means I can take you seriously because if you don't start there, that's my bar, if we can't talk about tort reform, then we're not going to change it. And I always say the line of people that are ready to give up what they've got and get something better, there's no one in that line who's like, I'm ready to, like everybody wants what they've got plus. And it's like, it's just not going to work that way.
That's right.
Well, listen, I appreciate your time. I know you're super busy, and I really, seriously, thank you for what you're doing. It really means a lot to me to have great Americans out there.
Yes, sir.
And I can't thank you enough for serving like this. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Pete. Look forward to next time.